So now that we have basically our interaction system, I'd say most of the way there, along with our barricade to allow us to, actually test it, we are ready to move on to some more interesting stuff. So specifically, firearms. However, before we do that, because they are going to be utilizing, again, primary data assets, soft pointers, and all this kind of stuff, we want to go ahead and basically just do a very brief setup of the asset manager. Now, the reason that this works and doesn't require setup in the asset manager is, honestly, I don't fully know why. Realistically, it shouldn't, but for whatever reason, this door seems to be continually loaded into memory. So that's okay. Maybe it has something with it being dragged into the world. I'm not entirely sure. However, things with like spawning a firearm and setting it up, those will not. So we're going to make a quick test here to demonstrate. So to begin this test, we need to first go ahead and construct basically a firearm, which in our case, we're going to be doing out of data. So what I mean by that is if you're using SKG, we have, two variations of ways to construct a firearm. The typical way, which is just, blueprint classes where you set, you add your firearm mesh component, a and all the other components you need and all that kind of stuff. And we also have the data route, kind of like what we were doing with this door. So that's the route we're going to take because we're trying to do this a more, I guess you could say, professional, put it in air quotes way. So to begin, we're going to go ahead and create the firearm data asset. So it comes built in kind of by default, and it's meant to be extended. So I'll kind of show you what I mean here in a second. So the first thing we want to do is create that firearm data asset. So if you search for SKG firearm, or SKG PDA firearm rather, here we have the base data asset. So DA underscore, we'll just do temp firearm. And up here at the top, it has a mesh, and this is kind of like just like the barricade, it is a soft object pointer. So we're going to select the 1911 mesh, and we can just leave everything else blank. We don't need to touch it for the sake of this. And then in our player pawn, we're going to go ahead and do a spawn actor from class. And for the class, we're going to use the SKG firearm. And as you can see, when I did that, it popped out with a construction data asset that we can plug in. So we're going to go ahead and select that. And I don't think it matters really, but we're going to set the owner to self. Once we've done that, we want to attach so attach actor to component. We want to attach it to our mesh at the socket name of IK and gun. And just set everything to snap to target. So once we've done that, and we press play, you can see we have some warnings here about data assets not being set. And you can see in our right hand, we have no firearm. So if I quickly go to the outliner, you can see there is a firearm spawned and it's right there in the hand at IK handgun. But it's not, visible. So if you go to details, nothing's here. Now, if I go ahead and open this 1911 mesh, so we get the mesh loaded into memory, and then I close it, now when I hit play, let me go by the light and look, you can see we actually have the mesh. And the reason for this is because we haven't set up the asset manager to know, basically where these are to actually load them. So if we go to edit, project settings, we have the asset manager right here. And what we want is the primary asset types to scan. So we're going to make kind of a more or less temporary one because we're going to end up changing it as we override. But we want the asset base class to be that SKG PDA firearm, like so. Then in regards to the directories, this is kind of like it's basically the location. We want the SKG zombies folder. And for the primary asset type, we can just do SKG PDA firearm and save that. So basically now when we hit play, it should go ahead and load this mesh into memory. So the way we can test that is by opening up the temp firearm and change it to something that has not been loaded. such as this BAR. So we'll hit save and hit play. And as you can see now, we have the bar. So we didn't have to actually go through and load the mesh into memory. It just did it itself. And then likewise, if I was to remove that and then load up, say, the STG or the Thompson, it would not load until we had this entry in the asset manager. So that's overall kind of the asset manager approach, and it's really quite simple. But we need to go ahead and get ourselves configured, at least in terms of like a folder structure, where we can, put all of our data assets, because we're going to have, one for each firearm. Each firearm is going to have several to basically initialize it. We're going to have for the barricades, for the wall weapons, if we do perks, all that kind of stuff is going to have its own data asset with assets that it's going to have to load into memory. So let's see, we're probably a good idea would be, it kind of makes sense to have it in core, but for the most part, we're having kind of everything at this moment in core. So we're likely going to want to, it's easy enough to move in reality because we just change, the directories. So for now, we're just going to go ahead and create a new folder, and we'll just put it in as data. So inside of data, we want data assets, and we want another one called weapons, or we'll do weapons, because I guess if we ever have the melee knife, it would go in there as well. We want another one for barricades, and I believe that to be sufficient for now. So for the time being, we can take this temp firearm and put it inside of the weapons folder and temp barricade inside of barricades. So we have that, and we can go ahead and go to our asset manager again. And we just want to change this path from SKG zombies to SKG zombies data assets. So I'm going to copy this, add another entry, and go to directories and just paste it in. So this one's going to be for the barricade. So PDA underscore barricade, and same thing, PDA underscore barricade for the name. So that's going to basically be scanning this directory for this data asset, and same thing, the exact same directory for this asset. And that'll take care of a lot of what we want. So basically any firearm we create, we would end up putting the firearm data asset right inside of here, and we don't have to worry about it. The asset manager is going to automatically find it. It's going to handle, everything for us. We don't have to go through and, be nitpicky, because we have them all kind of in one place. It's going to make our lives, a little bit easier. So with that said, we are likely going to end up having dedicated folders to different firearms. And the reason I say that is if we look at the temp firearm data asset, we're going to have, initialization settings for the procedural anim component, the aiming settings, various ones of these. Not all of them, but quite a few. And that's going to require, a handful of data assets. Different firearms can share data assets. We don't need to have them all be the same. So, for example, the procedural anim settings are potentially going to be the same between, a couple, just as an example. Well, maybe actually all of them. I can't remember what's in here. But, and as this gets extended, we're going to have more information. So what I mean by that is we're going to have, various abilities that the firearm grants when it is, given to you, and just stuff like that. But for now, this is kind of a good point. So we want to start building out the 1911. So I'm going to rename this one from DA temp firearm to DA underscore 1911 and make a corresponding 1911 folder. So let's drag and drop it into there. And we actually need to change the mesh from the bar to the 1911 before I forget. And once we have that, we can go ahead and just make a few of these. So the first thing we want is the procedural anim initialize settings. So let's go ahead and make a data asset, search for procedural, and you will see skg pda procedural anim initialize. So da underscore 1911 underscore procedural anim initialize settings. We open that up. We can see the procedural mesh name, which is static mesh, and this is currently incorrect. So if we go to the firearm itself, so here's the actors, skg firearm.h, we can see it is named firearm mesh component right here. So we want this as the name. So static mesh to firearm mesh component. We have the procedural aim socket names, which we're only going to have one, which is s underscore aim. So that is good to go. We have the procedural anim tag, which we are not going to use, and then just various gameplay tags, which again, we're probably not going to use in this context. So this here is something we can reuse across, all of our firearms for the most part. So instead of having it be part of the 1911, let's just go ahead and put it in the weapons folder. So we'll rename this one to da underscore firearm procedural anim initialize settings. So that way it'll be used for our bar, Thompson, and what was the other one? Bar, Thompson, STG, and the 1911. So let's go to our 1911 and set the procedural anim initialize settings. Next up, we want some aiming settings, which there is one in the example for the SKGSF core, but we want our own because this is going to be, more or less firearm dependent. So let's create a new data asset for aiming settings. And we'll do da underscore 1911 underscore aiming settings. And the reason the way I'm doing this is with the intention of copying and pasting for every single firearm that we have to make. So we kind of have a predefined starting point that we just have to, swap the assets for. So let's open the aiming settings. And for here, we can leave this as default. And once we, actually have everything set up, then we can go through and tweak and see, what do we need to change. So we're going to set that as the 1911 aiming settings. And this here is where we're going to stop. Because I just want, kind of the base set up to where when we hit play, we'll have the 1911 in our hand. And I basically just want the ability to be able to aim and shoot and all that kind of stuff. And then everything else we will worry about later. So this means we are going to be extending this SKG PDA firearm data asset to incorporate, all the information we're going to need, such as, the magazine capacity, the fire rate, whether or not it has full auto or semi-auto, all that kind of stuff we are going to be doing, basically defining inside of this, this data asset and constructing the firearm from. So we're going to subclass this, and we're going to subclass the SKG firearm class and pretty much just handle everything kind of inside of there. Well, actually, we might not even need to subclass this. We're likely going to end up just making a firearm component that is kind of dedicated to firearm logic. So it just depends. I need to do a little bit of pre-planning first. But yeah, that is going to be it for now. We have kind of the basis of what we are trying to do and how we are going to at least start going about doing it. So I will see you in the next video. If you like what I'm doing and you want to help support me, you can find a link to my Patreon in the description below, where you can also gain early access to this entire series.